I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying respects to the historic custodians of the land and waters and forests around which we gather, the Mi'kmaq and the Wolastoqiyik, the people of the beautiful river. The beauty of New Brunswick, indeed this entire region, is unparalleled, and as you will see in some of the research, particularly the Volume 2 People story that I think you all have today, this beauty matters to newcomers in the 21st century too. As we share knowledge today in pursuit of a better tomorrow, we'll be mindful of the traditional knowledge embedded with the Indigenous peoples who predate us all here. They welcomed us as we welcome others, and entering into peace and friendship treaties signed with the Crown. So today, as we're going to discuss strategies for attracting and retaining newcomers to Canada, we must not forget that we too are all newcomers. The goal today is nothing less than figuring out how to sustain an Atlantic ecosystem of growth and prosperity, where people continue to choose to make their homes and build their businesses, where populations settle permanently. The big question, and one of the big questions we've been looking at is not just attraction, but retention, and how attraction and retention fit together with one another. Now, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, Ahmad Hussein, himself a refugee to Canada, had badly wanted to be here today. So he sent us a video.
Attracting and retaining more newcomers to Atlantic Canada is key to that revitalization. More immigration means a growing population and economy, greater innovation, new ideas, companies and jobs, and better support for maintaining healthcare, public pensions, and our other social programs. Thanks to our multi-year immigration levels plan, we will welcome more newcomers to Canada than in many decades, most notably through the provincial nominee program. The Atlantic Immigration Program will help meet labor market needs and spur economic growth throughout the region. It'll also make it easier for employers to hire international students from the region's many first-rate schools. We're also strengthening efforts to settle and integrate newcomers to Atlantic Canada and give them the support that they need to make the region their permanent home.
Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce favorite native son of New Brunswick, Frank McKenna.
Why are we here today without having this problem solved? Well, it's very simple. Leaders change, governments change, priorities change, but there's an even more compelling reason than that. Inevitably in government, and those of you who are in government would recognize this, to effect dramatic change, you need a burning platform. There are a lot of things on your plate, and unless something is urgent, unless you have a burning platform under it, it's hard to get enough attention. Slow-moving train wrecks don't get too much attention. Demographic change is a slow-moving train wreck. As our brilliant Canadian demographer David Foote stated, the change that comes about as a result of demographic trends can be glacial, but it is inevitable. And he went on to state that demographics explain just about 2/3 of everything. Both of these statements turn out to be extraordinarily prescient. Well, the train track has arrived. We finally have our burning platform. We finally have all of the necessary elements to effect dramatic change, change that will arrest this lingering problem and hopefully to turn the tide and start us in a new direction. It's not excessively apocalyptic to say that if demography is destiny, Atlantic Canada is in a slow-moving death spiral at present if we don't do something about it. Facts are graphic. 10% of Canadians lived in Atlantic Canada in 1966. Today that number is 6.6%. 70% of immigrants come to Montreal, Toronto, or Vancouver, and 65% ultimately end up in Toronto alone, providing absolute jet fuel to that economy. It's called the city, they call it the city of the crane. There's a crane on every corner in Toronto, and the only place rivaling that growth is Vancouver, also because of the enormous number of newcomers to the city. Atlantic Canada, by contrast, only receives about 2.5% of immigrants. We don't get our fair share, and we sure don't keep our fair share. Without a larger base, it's almost impossible to attract and keep an immigrant population. Immigrants go where immigrants are. Immigrants stay where immigrants are. It's a continually reinforcing negative cycle. In the whole region, we've got the second lowest fertility rate in Canada. We've lost over 40,000 people to the rest of Canada over the last 30 years. The province that we're in today actually sustained more deaths than births for the first time since Statistics Canada began tracking the data. Even more ominously, the population is not just leaving, it's getting older. The Atlantic Canada region has aged twice as fast as Alberta since 1971. Our median age is now 8 years older than Alberta, and of course this demographic time bomb is now exploding in the faces of our governments. An aging population costs more. A declining population base results in less equalization, fewer transfers for health and education, less money raised from income tax, less money raised from consumption tax, and of course an aging population costs more, exponentially more. It's exponentially more expensive. The results are being felt on the streets. Universities are struggling for students. Communities are desperately trying to keep schools open that are half full. Hospitals are crammed with expensive bed blockers. Business cannot get workers. These are all the ominous signs of what we're living through. But, and this is an important but there are signs of hope. In fact, I feel more hopeful today than I ever have over the last 25 years. All of our provinces have population secretariats, and extraordinarily capable people are staffing these population secretariats. ACOA has put its shoulder to the wheel and its resources to the wheel. And the recently signed Atlantic immigration pilot is a huge step in the right direction. It will facilitate the entry of thousands of immigrants to Atlantic Canada and include temporary foreign workers and families. It's a recognition of the unique needs of our region. I think it's the first time the Government of Canada has recognized the unique needs of this region and the fact that we can't possibly be expected to attract and or retain immigrants without laying some type of a base down and creating a critical mass in our communities. Recently, Atlantic premiers have also established an Atlantic-wide initiative to help retain foreign students in our region. Study and Stay program, also important. These initiatives are all commendable. Now the ball is in our court. We have to keep these people here, and that's what today is really all about. We've not been successful to date. Our retention rate is poor. It's the worst in Canada. But that's what you would expect when you are new at the game and don't have a base down and don't have all of the characteristics that immigrants are looking for when they come to a community. That is changing, but the legacy history that we have is one now of not being able to keep people in our region as well as the rest of Canada. So that brings us to the reason why this public policy conference is being dedicated to the issue of immigrant retention as a key pillar of Atlantic revitalization.
This is the number of annual out-migrants by age group from New Brunswick to anywhere else in Canada. And what you can see from the blue in particular, those are young New Brunswickers 18 to 24. We lose about anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 of them per year. If you think through the implications of that out-migration of your future skills to other regions of Canada, this has to be part of the solution. How do you keep more of these young New Brunswickers in the province? So we can talk about immigration, but what we're really talking about is backfilling for this exodus. With the levels we have now of around 1,000, we're keeping some, but we're just replacing a lot of the workers that are going out that we could have used. And some of it might be expedience. The immigrants have more experience and the skills we need right away, so they can backfill right away. But if we make the investment in retention here, maybe we don't need as many immigrants initially, but we can grow as the economy starts to get its kickstart back. But if we want to completely replace this, we need 1,000 more immigrants filing taxes in New Brunswick per year in the entry cohorts. So it's a big increase in the numbers that we need, but don't forget about the opportunity about immigrant retention. And recessions in Alberta are actually very good for New Brunswick, so what we're seeing with the pipeline problems is that Justin Trudeau might be doing us a solid by keeping more New Brunswickers here. Now, suppose that the population has an economic growth problem. In this case, immigration, population retention, and population growth will all increase if we increase labor demand. In other words, immigration is not a solution to anything, it's the response to solving the problem. And what I want to put in your heads here is Saskatchewan, which up until 2005 also had no population growth, losing lots of its population in neighboring Alberta in particular, and having serious problems like population aging. After 2005, with the commodity super cycle and all the investment that came in labor demand, within 10 years, they've grown to about 1.2 million population, and they reversed population aging. This is not a long-term process. This is a bang-bang solution when you get labor demand and opportunities up. Most research that's coming out recently is pointing towards labor demand as the driver of population growth. So Exhibit 1 from Statistics Canada this year by Renee Morissette is the scatter plot up top, and it looked at Canada's economic, Statistics Canada's economic regions. And what he correlates is that wherever you see labor demand rising first, you get more population growth. So in other words, capital and export demands, which is driving a lot of this, is what's driving the population growth to the region, and immigration is part of that. But since 2011, there's been almost no increase in the net size of the capital stock in New Brunswick or Nova Scotia. The private sector investment rate is about 1% per year. So as a result of that, if you look at the rest of Canada, it's up at around 6 to 8%. And in New Brunswick, what we have is a public sector investment rate that currently equals the private sector. So we're trying to offset weak private sector investment with public sector investment, and this could be why we're struggling to create some of those jobs. And finally, in a stagnant economy, immigration provides an option value for hope. In particular, entrepreneurial newcomers, of which there are many, and because Canadian history is based on entrepreneurial newcomers, it's like winning the lottery if some of them land in your province and decide they like it here, and they create the new industry and the new opportunity. And that's really important to always keep in mind, is that every time you have a cohort come in, you may have the next Gretzky of business or an industry. And that's why immigration will always be important, whether they're coming in because you have growth or whether you're bringing them in because you need to backfill and you have some needs in the meantime.
And you have this problem still, but it's evolving very quickly, of New Brunswickers being welcoming and saying, oh my God, this person's brown, what are they doing in my town? But what has happened in places like St. George is the same story in Meteghan in Nova Scotia, is that these people actually have kids. And the next thing you know, these kids are going to school. And this school that they were going to close, all of a sudden has a lot of people. And so all of a sudden the town starts to say, well, not only, because I really don't care if this fish plant is making money and doing things of that nature, but that's important to see these kids in our schools, keeping our teachers, keeping the grocery stores going. And this is part of this dynamic change that's occurring slowly, but under the surface throughout the Maritimes in terms of acceptance, reluctant acceptance, but it is coming and is coming quickly. What's happening today is change in attitudes has been driven by entrepreneurs and business owners in the Maritimes. They are the forces, and they don't even know it until you tell them. They are the forces of social change in the Maritimes, and it's quite dramatic. And we come back to capital, we look at things like, geez, okay, so you got 40% of your workers in St. George that are foreign workers. In the next 3 years, in just aquaculture, we're going to see over $1 billion of private sector money going in directly into the expansion of that export industry. And by the way, they need not only workers at that level, but they also need people to make these robotics work. And the typical worker that is required is 2 years community college, 2 years engineering. They got to be able to fix the little machines physically, but they have to understand electronics, they have to understand that. And these jobs start everywhere at $80,000 a piece. And this is the dynamic of what's happening in our economy, and it didn't exist 5 years ago. And so it's a beginning of a movement, it's a beginning of an attitude change, but it's the start of where capital and people come together.
An entrepreneur, a business owner has a lot of things on his or her mind. And attracting immigration is now a new one. But retaining those people and making sure there's the cultural connections, et cetera, how much is their responsibility, and how do they build those connections with people who really do have know-how?
So let me be blunt. It's 100% their responsibility. If a business person doesn't have the wherewithal to go up and engage them, then too bad. You're not going to have employers, and you should be out of business. I don't have a lot of sympathy for people that say they can't. They need to. They have to be told where and how, et cetera. But it is up to it's vital to their future. I mean, it's a business problem, and they're motivated by profit. You want to have profit, you want to grow, you got to do this. Get your head around it.
You know, what most particularly do you think we have to see?
Frankly, I think you just need to continue and facilitate this cultural change. I think with employers, the good news is they're driven by necessity. And so they don't need much of a push. I can't tell you how many times sitting around a table with 7 or 8 business people, I'll say this, and one head will come up and say, well, that's exactly my problem. The person next to them said, well, it's mine too. And all 7 of them say it, and they say, well, we didn't realize we all had this problem. So there's a prise de conscience, you'd say in French, that is starting to occur. I think these kinds of forums are excellent.
In 2006 and 2016. And overall, the differential, newcomers are earning 5.6% more than Canadian-born workers in Atlantic Canada. That advantage has been dropping since 2006. It's not as high as it was. And it doesn't exist in all areas anymore. But you'll see that the economic outcomes are pretty significant. Is that the average annual income for newcomers in every class, with the exception of PEI, and there's some differences there, is higher for family class and for economic class than the Canadian average. So this is pretty important if we believe that immigrants are leaving primarily for economic reasons. If immigrants are actually, particularly economic immigrants, are doing better in Atlantic Canada than they are in the rest of Canada, perhaps that's something people would like to know and should know. It shows that attitudes toward immigration are changing and shifting in Atlantic Canada. So it shows that people actually want more immigrants than they did a few years ago. This is actually a 2016 survey, but there's a significant shift over just 2 years. I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity first to hear from someone who really matters, one of the newcomers who has chosen this as home. So you arrived in 2015.
Yep.
So can you tell me a little bit about how that happened?
Well, it was my husband's idea to move from Israel. To be honest, it took me a year just to consider leaving Israel. It wasn't an easy decision to make. But when we thought about it, we decided that Israel won't give us and our kids the best future that we hope for them and for us. And then we agreed that moving out of Israel will be at least the experience of trying succeed in a different place will be good for us. And then we started to investigate immigration. Canada was a very good place for us to move into for a couple of reasons. Most of them were because we have friends that moved to Canada a couple of years before us, and they really recommended about St. John and New Brunswick. And I mean, we didn't know anything else. We had no experience in other countries, so we decided to give it a go, and we started the immigration process, which it was a really long process.
How long?
It took us, I think, a little less than 2 years to finally move to St. John. We came for a 10-day visit on 2014 to meet the Jewish community and to get to know St. John and around, and that was really helpful, especially for me, because till the day I arrived to St. John, I wasn't sure that I'm doing the right decision. But I mean, everyone was so welcoming, and everyone were amazing.
You must have had some challenges along the way in
yeah.
that process. Tell me about some of them.
We're still dealing with some. I think the biggest challenge was not knowing. We didn't know the bureaucracy that we had to deal with. We didn't know the rules that we need to follow. We didn't know the culture.
How hard or easy was it for you and your family to find work?
I wouldn't say easy, because it's not that people stood in line and asked us to join the company. You still need to make your resume. You still need to go to interviews. The first job that we had was for an American startup. And it was a good opportunity for us, and it was a good opportunity for him, because as newcomers, he got a lot of help from the Canadian government or the province, I'm not sure. But it was very good for us. It was a kickstart for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we brought those 34 people into the room with the question of how might we become leaders at attracting, welcoming, and retaining newcomers to contribute to the economy of New Brunswick. And this was running in parallel to the Atlantic pilot. So this is, refugees were not in the scope of this lab, but all the economic newcomer streams that go with the Atlantic pilot is really the scope of what we worked on in the lab. And really dove into two sub-questions of that. So how do we help newcomers find meaningful work and feel part of the New Brunswick community? And how do we help employers find the talent that they need to grow their businesses? And how could we design solutions around the user's needs? So some of the key insights we gained, I would say as a whole, not just at the specific teams, were that employers are really unaware of the benefits of hiring newcomers, and also unaware of the process that they need to follow. We had a really great opportunity to put to have employers at the table. Two of the employers we had at the table work with rural manufacturing issues. So often also the hiring needs for newcomers is also often misunderstood, or the whole process is misunderstood from the employer perspective. On the newcomer side, there seems to be a real mismatch of the newcomers that are on the ground looking for work and the employers looking for talent. And sometimes that's just a miscommunication, and sometimes it's actually a mis-skilled set. So there's a gap there. Also, the integration of newcomer families and spouses, and that being such an important part of the family's experience and interest in staying. And so we had a team that kind of dove into that a bit more. Also, just the public awareness and the benefit of newcomers coming to New Brunswick was a big piece that we kept coming across. So that welcoming community of New Brunswickers. So we have cycle 2 is starting April 16th to 20th, and we're looking for teams this time. So not individuals coming in and then deciding what issue they want to work on.
So we noticed that a lot of international students, or whether you're a newcomer or an immigrant, you come here and you're always looking at New Brunswick as your pit stop on your way to Ontario, where your diverse culture may exist, or you'll find more grounds with your ethnicity, right? So what we found is that in New Brunswick, whether you're a newcomer or a local, there's a lot of people who are seeking to make those connections, but just not sure how to go about doing it. So then we were thinking about, people may be biased. They might not be open to that experience. So we ruled that group out, and we said, let's look at the folks who already attend our multicultural associations, right? The events that we host. Those people already want to know and is taking an active interest. So let's figure out how we can utilize those forums to create those connections. So my team and I are working on a toolkit, along with a couple of other events that we can hand over to the organizers of those events to make those events more interactive, to create those connections. So now we all go, we eat, we drink, we see the show, and then we all go home.
Dee works at Citel.
Yeah.
What from the lab how has that impacted kind of going back to work?
In working in a contact center, one thing is, everything's changing every day. It's go, go, go. You have no time to breathe or take a step. And the lab really made me come in and just pause and think.
So Heather is a program consultant with the provincial government, PEDAL? Yeah. So I guess the same, what kind of prototype, what was your prototype and experience of the lab?
We said New Brunswick needs to look at this lens of cultural awareness and moving people into a new space of acceptance. And so in the end, we came up with a prototype that is really trying to get to the root of the issue through youth. We came up with a grant program for teachers that will help them to build culturally vibrant classrooms, schools, communities, and we're hoping to roll it out 2018-19. And if we don't take a step back and stop looking at it as just a numbers game, it's a people game. And people are so much more than just that job that they come here for.
How, like going back to work after the lab, how has that impacted your work?
Oh, 2 words, big energy, big energy. Huge fire in my belly. I really believe that this is truly a leadership opportunity for GMB to look at diversity and inclusion and newcomer integration and to put a stake in the ground and to say this is the brand of New Brunswick and we're going to be leaders on this and these are the pieces that need to be put into place to make that happen.
First of all, the Atlantic provinces will soon begin to see the benefits of the government's 2018 multi-year immigration levels plan. That's a mouthful, which has the highest admission levels in recent history. So to help address our country's demographic challenges now and in the future, the government will be increasing admissions to 310,000 permanent residents in 2018. And this will trend towards 1% of the Canadian population, reaching 340,000 admissions in 2020. Under this plan, 40% of overall growth in 2018 will be allocated to the provincial nominee programs, and admissions will increase by 33% over 3 years in these programs. What this means for the Atlantic provinces is that they will now be able to directly select more newcomers, who can help meet the specific labor market and economic needs of this region. The second initiative that's underway is the Atlantic Immigration Pilot, which has been spoken about a little bit today. As some of you know, Minister Hussein was here in New Brunswick last month with the Atlantic premiers and his federal colleagues at the Atlantic Growth Strategy Leadership Committee meeting. And there was general agreement at that meeting that immigration can play an important role in filling labor shortages and building a skilled workforce. It's an employer-driven initiative, which means that businesses can find the skilled immigrants with the specific skills that they need and be part of bringing those newcomers to Canada. The third element that we're doing right now in collaboration with our partners is really increasing our efforts to retain immigrants. We need to support newcomers in the region to make meaningful contributions to the labor market and to help grow the region's economy in the long term by staying here. Successful integration often involves things that many Canadians take for granted. Having a support network, speaking English or French, forming social connections in the community, and knowing how to access services. So if we want newcomers to feel welcomed, it's crucial that we have the proper supports in place to assist their integration into Canadian society. With the help of settlement service providers, all immigrants who arrive under the Atlantic Immigration Pilot will have a settlement plan in place even before they arrive.
The problem is visa processing times. So I just came from Vietnam. Even with the Express Study Program, the SDS, which is a great program, we're looking at 2 to 3 months processing times, whereas the US is measuring 6-7 days, Australia 2 to 3 weeks. So I'm just curious if there are any plans or strategies to address that.
We're prioritizing it, but I think we'll just need to plan for a little bit longer processing times than we're probably used to.
So now I want to know what keeps you up at night. What's that big worry that you just need, it's the problem you want to solve and it keeps you up at night?
I don't know. I guess dealing with that glass wall thing maybe is one of the big ones. It's like, how do you get the community, the established community, to really reach out to newcomers, because newcomers are not always able to do the reaching out, because where do you reach? You know, what right. exists?
Everything that we do really does depend on making sure that we have community buy-in, making sure that people understand the value of immigration, and even going beyond that to actually try and actively debunk a lot of the misconceptions and myths that there can be around there about, the typical tropes like newcomers are stealing jobs and, they drain the social system in terms of services and all that, none of which is true.
Just to the point around diversity, it really is important that we look at the structures of our leadership structures, our conversations like this, and whether we have the kind of diversity represented, because again, if we're talking about immigration and we recognize that diversity of thought contributes to better ideas and better solutions, we're missing some diversity in this conversation.
The big thing that keeps me up at night is we have an immigration strategy in Greater Moncton. We're actually in the last year of our immigration strategy. It's about 90% achieved, and like any of you know, working on a strategy where you can achieve more than 50% of it is a huge win for our community, and we've certainly seen tremendous growth in our region. 51% of our population growth in Greater Moncton is now coming from immigration. In Greater Moncton, we have a lot of Francophone international students. We have a lot of students at our MBCC, for instance, in our private colleges. You know what? They want to stay. How do we change or resist that monolithic narrative about immigration?
The point that I really want to make clear here is that you can do all the work you want on things like employment, family reunification, language training, but none of that will matter if you don't have that support and if you're not taking active steps to make sure that people understand the value of diversity. The United States is a frightening example of what can happen in those cases.
And definitely second that, because you have so many situations that are either overtly, racist at their worst to just inadvertently awkward because somebody has grown up here their entire life and doesn't necessarily have those skills because they haven't been in contact with many people from many different cultures.
What's the one thing that a newcomer has told you that totally changed the way you do your work?
I can tell you, like routinely, we all have blind spots. I mean, ultimately, they're all going to be anecdotes about my blind spots or their blind spots. And you don't know that you have these blind spots. And they don't know that they have them when they're coming. We don't know our own blind spots.
Every day brings something new. And it's how do we respond to that? And that's where really, when we're looking at the bones, we've worked a lot on the labor market. We've done some great strides on that. And so now how can we bring it to also the community level? And how can we ensure that when an immigrant's moving into an apartment building or moving into a neighborhood that they have at least one friend in that community that can bring them to the park or go for a walk with them?
So how do you create more awareness amongst those who will not seek out that knowledge?
But I also think that the other part of this question about being shy around asking questions around religion and customs and things like that goes to a cultural attribute of just Canadians in general, and maybe even Atlantic Canadians especially, which is just politeness. It is a little bit of a stereotype around Canadians, but we're often afraid to ask questions.
A lot of newcomers are saying to us, well, like Canadians seem to go out often after the work week and go out for a beer or go out somewhere, like how do you get into that? It's like, well, how do you get into that, especially if you don't have a job at the time and so on. So we created our own little Friday Friendship Hour, and everyone is welcome, established locals or newcomers, anyone.
What would be your 30-second pitch on why communities need to be doing more to integrate people into their community?
So I do think that local immigration partnerships play a really great role in getting community members, all levels of government, immigrants themselves, ethnocultural associations, you name it, around a table towards a common objective.
A big point is demographics. Again, in Newfoundland and Labrador, we saw the stats, but this is particularly acute in Newfoundland and Labrador, oldest population, in fact, most rapidly aging population in the country. Trends toward outmigration, things like that. That means that immigration is just a growing necessity there.
Diverse community is a stronger community, and the how is to make sure that newcomers are involved in decision-making roles on boards, as employees, staff, volunteers, etc.
Moving this from a fringe issue to a central issue. This is a kind of a group of people that are focused on this, but the rest of the machinery of government, provincially, municipally, they don't understand that this is central to their future.
So as part of the Atlantic Growth Strategy, the immigration pilot has created 3 new employer-driven immigration programs to help the region attract and retain skilled foreign workers and international graduates. And since the pilot launched on January 27, 2017, more than 1,000 Atlantic employers have expressed an interest in participating, and nearly 900 Atlantic employers have become eligible to recruit immigrants to fill job vacancies. Okay, Chris, let's get started.
From an HR perspective, we are creating, for the first time ever, an Immigration Center of Excellence, and this is all about attracting and retaining immigrants. So that's something we have in the works right now. And we're doing a number of innovative initiatives for newcomers that we haven't done in the past, but it goes to show you the type of things that our organization and many others are doing to make sure the settlement process works.
Diversity is at the heart of everything where IBM is focused and our belief in it. Our president and chairman of the board actually this year, she began to refer to our focus as going beyond just diversity to more of a model of inclusion. And that's what we've got in our work team now. And today, I'm actually at 540 staff, and I checked when I came in today, 270 of my staff joined the center as an early professional. And of those, 110 of them came as international students.
We've actually licensed 2 of our employees on my team to be able to work through the immigration process for permanent residencies for those that we've brought in. So we worked with the New Brunswick government and the AIPP program to be able to streamline that process and dedicate one person from my team to be able to take them through that process, help them get through their medical certification before they actually get approved, their language testing, all of those things, and walk them through. And we also work with the business partners to develop that settlement process. How do they connect with community services? How do they connect with agencies that will help them find housing and transportation, all those sorts of things.
What's your advice on how do we position Atlantic Canada for success?
Part of the challenge is trying to compete with Toronto. But truthfully, so many of them have already got a taste and love and desire to be in Toronto. We tried to recruit them down here, and they all said how much they wanted to come to Nova Scotia and how interested they were to get here. But I think I lost 50% of them within the first year.
The village of Chipman has a person now working for them that is responsible for settlement. The village of Chipman. They have 1,100 people, and they have an employee that's responsible for settlement. We have somebody that's responsible for settlement in that area, one of our HR folks. And so it highlights that how things have changed and what needs to be done. And one of the things we're dealing with right now is, for instance, we need more people in Chipman. And so a situation that you may not run up against in St. John or Halifax would be housing, right? So if you need 40 people in the village of Chipman, just as an example, where do you put them? And so we're actually in conversations with the provincial government, with the village of Chipman, with how do we do that?
You had an interesting story that we talked about with respect to the recruitment of spouses.
So we had a gentleman that we actually were able to successfully, under the AIPP program, to be able to bring in someone from Cuba in our IT department. And it just so happens is we asked him and said, what does your wife do, before they came? Said, and what type of roles do you have? And would she interested in working when she came? And so we interviewed, and it turns out a great fit. So now we got 2 for 1, if you will. We were able to get the IT specialist that we needed, and at the same time find employment for his spouse. So, it was a win-win on both sides.
What is your advice to us, to government, to the PPF, when it comes to smaller employers?
If you don't understand the cultural differences as you bring in immigrants into the workforce, if you don't educate the leaders to how to deal with the new immigrant and the struggles they're going to go through, then you're going to miss something along the way, I believe.
Most of us are very community-based. We're very focused on, the Halifax Chamber of Commerce concept of all ships rise. It's by business working together, and we need to collaborate together to drive this whole concept.
we're going to do 8,800 hires in the next 3 years, and 5,100 of those will be in New Brunswick. And so we have a director of immigration. We have, lots of HR folks. But if you're a company that has 5 employees and you need 5 more, for instance, getting through that whole process, I think they've made leaps and bounds, through the AIPP and other sources to make it more efficient. But it's still daunting, I think, to a lot of small and medium-sized companies.
Give us the story of one of those success stories.
And I needed to bring in a senior technical architect that could lead our activity. None of them existed in the country. We went to India and we found one working for IBM. I brought him as a temporary foreign worker. At the end of his duration with us, he was eligible for permanent residency, and I managed to convince him to stay with us over top of offers to move to IBM in Toronto and also to competitors in Toronto. And he went home to India, got married, brought his wife back with him. He's now leading, he's our lead technical architect on our team. His wife has now joined our employment because I agree with that same concept. Wherever we can, we try to bring in spouses because it helps to keep them with us. And last week he became a Canadian citizen.
So one of the thoughts we had was the EI program, it's got $1 billion surplus. Could money be taken out of that for a pilot in New Brunswick, where you would take that money, you would take the unemployed individuals, you would take underemployed individuals, you would pay them the EI rate, you would pay for their tuition, you would put them through the course, you would have employers lined up to hire them, and we matched those up. And it sounds really simple, but I don't really believe it's happening today. And it's something that I know we've been working hard at. We're hoping to get it lined up, but if you could do a pilot, and Angelique talked about how we were nimble, and New Brunswick is a small province, and we can do these types of things. I think this is a great opportunity to do something like that.
One of our workers that we'd immigrated from India, brought his family with him. So and he had 2 young daughters, and so just before Christmas time, I think it was on the 22nd or 23rd of December. My wife and I are in the grocery store in Woodstock, and there's Manish and his wife and 2 daughters, and the 2 daughters are in their parka and they're running around. And I said, how are you? And this was about a day before a big storm hit, I think on the 22nd. And I said, how are you enjoying Canada? And they said, oh, we love it. We got our new parkas. They said, we can't wait for it to snow. And I sort of chuckled because about a week later, they got about 4 feet of snow sitting in there. So I called them up after New Year's and I said, so how did your daughters like the snow? And they said they liked it for about 20 minutes.
Have you had to increase local wages and or working conditions in order to retain people?
It's really messaging and explaining to people that living in a community like Halifax or anywhere in the land of Canada, it's a different cost of living to living in Toronto. So it's really helping, or living in central Canada somewhere, because that's where the competition more often is coming from. And so, that's actually part of our offer is if you want to have a better standard of living and you can live here and have a living wage at a more reasonable level wage. So the answer is no.
You're not going to pay someone who lives in, let's say, Saskatoon, the same thing for the same job that you're going to pay someone in Toronto. But you need to be market competitive. So you need to have a compensation strategy. But you don't. So you're not being reactive. You're going to attract and retain talent. You have to have a compensation strategy for each region so you are competitive.
Let's do a rapid round of last thoughts.
Everybody's trying to do it better and more efficient. And I think in the long run, the better we get at it, the folks that come behind us and the small and medium-sized enterprises that follow behind us, this will be helpful for them as well.
And I'm glad I've heard a lot of conversation today about the education element, because that's such a critical component. And partnering with the post-secondary schools and the international students and having that all integrated into a single process is so critical.
What I would say is if you've got 75% of the plan done, don't think you have to have a perfect plan. Just get going, and you'll learn along the way. And that's fine. It's okay to stub your toe. That's how you learn.
Great, and thank you, Laura. Thanks so much.
So when it comes to policy direction and the work that the Public Policy Forum is doing here, I think the Public Policy Forum is in a really unique place to bring us together from an Atlantic perspective. And while there's been some collaboration, I think there's more opportunity for more. We're trying to solve this, this revitalization problem together, and I really think that the Public Policy Forum has, by being here today, is playing that role. But in their work here over the next 3 years with this project is in that unique position to really bring all of the stakeholders together and look at this from an Atlantic focus.